In 2004, at the end of the first SpongeBob movie, our hero stands up in front of a captured town and plays a guitar to save the day. Picture that guitar right now. A lot of you are seeing something tall and pointy and white, shaped like the letter V, the kind a real rock star would swing around. That guitar does not exist. It never did. The one in the movie is shaped like a peanut, and it has been a peanut since the very first day, on every copy ever made. That is the strange thing about SpongeBob. A whole generation grew up inside this show and remembers huge pieces of it wrong, while the realest, heaviest, most surprising truths sat hidden in plain sight the entire time. A grumpy neighbor whose name lies about what he is. A happy town named after one of the darkest real places on Earth. A creator who quietly buried his whole life inside a cartoon. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get into it. The guitar everyone remembers wrong. Back in 2004, the very first SpongeBob movie arrived in theaters, and like most things SpongeBob, it ended on a high note. The whole town of Bikini Bottom had been taken over. Plankton had slipped little mind control helmets onto almost everyone. The secret recipe was stolen, Mr. Krabs had been frozen solid, and the bright, silly town had gone gray and quiet. SpongeBob had crossed half the ocean floor to fix it, getting older and sadder along the way, almost giving up more than once. And then, at the end of all of it, he stands up in front of the whole crowd. He does not throw a punch. He does not give a long speech. He sings. A big, loud, happy rock song called Goofy Goober Rock comes pouring out of him, and that song is the thing that breaks the helmets, frees the town, and saves the day. To understand the song, you have to understand the goober. Earlier in the movie, there is a place called the Goofy Goober Ice Cream Party Boat, a peanut-themed ice cream parlor that SpongeBob and Patrick adore the way little kids adore the most magical restaurant in town. The mascot of the place is a goofy cartoon peanut. The whole spot is built around Peanut. SpongeBob even sings a slower, sadder version of the Goober song in there, at a low point in the story, drowning his sorrows in ice cream. So by the time the loud rock version explodes at the end, the peanut has already been planted all over the movie. The peanut is the whole theme. The peanut is the heart of the joke. Everything about that ending is soaked in peanuts before SpongeBob ever picks up the guitar. It became one of the most loved endings in any cartoon movie ever made. Kids who watched it got goosebumps. Parents sitting next to them got the same goosebumps. The bright lights, the music swelling up, the way SpongeBob throws his head back and lets go of every worry he has ever carried. For a whole lot of people, that single scene sits locked away as one of the best parts of their entire childhood. One little piece of that scene breaks for almost everyone though. A huge number of those people remember the wrong guitar. Most people who grew up with that movie, if they stop and picture the guitar SpongeBob plays during that last song, will describe a tall, pointy guitar shaped like the letter V. Plenty of them will add that it was white and shiny, the kind of guitar a rock star would swing around on a giant stage. Some go further and say it was purple. Others swear it had two necks, a double guitar, two sharp points stacked together. A few even remember SpongeBob drifting down from above, dressed all in white, glowing a little, almost like a small angel holding a bright pointy guitar in his hands. That memory feels real. It feels heavy and solid. People can shut their eyes and see the whole thing clearly. The guitar in the movie has the shape of a peanut, round and lumpy and brown, with that little pinch in the middle where a peanut shell bends. There are no sharp points on it. It is not white, and it is not purple, and it does not have two necks. It is a soft, goofy, peanut-shaped guitar, and it fits the moment beautifully, because the entire scene is built around a character called the Goofy Goober, who happens to be a peanut. The ice cream place SpongeBob loves so much is peanut-themed. The whole song is a goober song, so a peanut guitar makes complete sense once someone points it out. The shape was a quiet little joke that matched everything else in the scene. The peanut is simply not the thing living inside most people's heads. There is another part of that very same scene that people forget right alongside the guitar, which makes the whole thing even stranger. In the middle of the rock song, the movie cuts to a quick gag where SpongeBob briefly turns into a real human, a live-action person, strumming a live-action version of that same peanut guitar. It is a goofy little surprise stuck right into the cartoon, and a lot of the people who swear they remember a cool pointy guitar also do not remember this human moment at all. Two pieces of the same scene, both clear as day on the actual movie, both quietly missing or rewritten in a huge number of memories. The brain did not just change the guitar, it tidied up the whole sequence into something smoother and cooler than what was really there. For a long time, nobody really argued about any of this. People just carried their own version of the memory around without ever checking it against anyone else. Then, around the year 2019, somebody finally wrote about it online. They said they remembered a V-shaped guitar from that scene, pointy and tall, and they asked whether anybody else remembered it the same way. The answers poured in fast. Hundreds of people said yes, that is exactly what I remember. A pointy guitar, a cool one, never a peanut. The whole thing truly caught fire a few years after that. Near the end of 2022, the idea jumped onto short video apps, and from there it spread everywhere. People filmed themselves talking about the guitar they were so certain they remembered. The pointy one, the white one, the one with two necks. Comment sections filled with thousands of people promising they remembered the very same shape. All of them sure, all all of them surprised that anyone would say otherwise. A few people decided to settle the whole thing the easy way. They went and dug out their old copies of the movie, the actual disc, the same ones they had watched as little kids years before. They pressed play, jumped to the ending, and pointed a camera at the screen so everyone could watch along with them. Every single time, the same thing appeared: a peanut. The guitar was a peanut in 2004, and it stayed a peanut on every copy anyone could find. One of those videos, where a woman plays the scene straight off her own disc and the peanut shows up plain as anything, got watched millions of times in a single day. Even the oldest clips floating around the internet told the same story. The earliest version of that scene anyone could find had been posted all the way back in 2008, years before a single person was arguing about guitars. Peanut, same as always, there was no hidden older cut of the movie. Nobody had swapped the guitar out and slipped a new one in. The movie had always shown that one soft round shape, start to finish. The reason so many people remember it wrong has nothing to do with the movie changing and everything to do with the way memory works. Memory is not like a video sitting on a shelf, playing back exactly what happened. Memory is more like a drawing the brain sketches fresh each time someone tries to remember, using a few real scraps and then filling the empty spots with whatever feels about right. When the brain reaches for a picture of a rock star holding a guitar, it grabs the most common version it has stored away. And the most common rock guitar shape, the one stamped on countless posters and toys and music videos, is that tall, pointy V. So the brain quietly trades the real shape for the one it expects. The peanut gets painted over, the cool rock guitar slides into the empty space, and the person never feels the swap happening at all. This is also the reason the wrong memories are not random. They almost all drift in the same direction, toward the same cool, pointy rock star guitar, because everyone's brain is reaching into the same shared pile of pictures. We have all seen 1,000 rock concerts on screens, 1,000 posters, 1,000 toy guitars in store windows, and almost all of them are pointy. So when a crowd of people each fill in the same blank, they each grab from the same pile and land on roughly the same answer. That is why the false memory is shared instead of scattered. It is not that everyone made the exact same mistake by chance. It is that everyone's brain was working from the same stack of expectations, and the stack pointed the same way for all of them. There is one more piece that almost certainly feeds the mix-up, and this one comes from inside the SpongeBob world itself. In one of the most famous episodes the show ever made, an episode called Band Geeks, there is a big musical ending where a whole group of characters perform a song together in front of a stadium crowd. During that performance, Sandy plays a guitar that is purple and shaped like a sharp V, a real pointy one. That episode is one of the most watched and most beloved in the entire series, which means millions of people already have a purple V-shaped guitar sitting somewhere in their heads from a different SpongeBob moment. It would be the easiest thing in the world for the brain to lift that image out of one famous scene and quietly paste it into another. Two big musical endings, two huge waves of feeling, and somewhere in the shuffle, the guitars get traded without anyone meaning to. When a whole crowd of people end up sharing the exact same wrong memory like this, the wrong memory gets a name. People call it a Mandela Effect. The name itself comes from a real and famous example. A great many people were once absolutely certain that a world-famous leader named Nelson Mandela had died in prison back in the 1980s. They remembered hearing about it. Some even claimed to remember news coverage of it. He had not died then at all. He walked free, went on to lead his country, and lived for many more years. But so many people shared that same wrong memory of his early death that the whole strange phenomenon got named after him. A Mandela effect happens when a large group of people all remember something the same way, feel totally sure about it, and turn out to be wrong together. The guitar is one of the cleanest examples anyone could ask for, because it is so easy to test. The proof is sitting on a shelf in millions of homes. Anybody can press play and look with their own eyes, and even after they look, even after the peanut shows up clear as day, the old wrong memory still tries to hang on. Part of why this one digs in so deep is the feeling wrapped around it. That ending is no small throwaway moment. It is the giant emotional finish of a movie a whole generation grew up inside of. The song is all about being a kid and being perfectly okay with that, about not needing to be tough or grown up or cool to matter. For a lot of young viewers, that scene arrived at exactly the age when the world was starting to push them to act older than they were, and it told them, in a loud and goofy and happy way, that staying soft and silly was allowed. A memory soaked in that much feeling gets gripped tight. And when a memory is gripped that tight, the brain works hard to protect the feeling at the center of it, even while it lets a few small details slide loose around the edges. There is a quiet sadness in which detail the brain decides to throw away. People held tight to the feeling, the goosebumps, the rush of the song, the meaning of the moment. The thing they let slip was the silliest part, the peanut. And the peanut was never just a decoration. It was the punchline, the soft, goofy joke planted in the middle of the big, triumphant finish. The reminder that even in his greatest, loudest, most heroic moment, SpongeBob was still ridiculous, still a goober, still himself. So a lot of people, without meaning to, protected the grandness of the memory by quietly deleting the goofiness from it. They kept the hero and lost the joke. They remembered feeling powerful and forgot that the whole point was that he was powerful while holding a peanut. The strange little twist is that the peanut was always the better choice anyway. A normal pointy guitar would have been the dull pick. It would have looked like every other big concert scene in every other movie. The peanut is the joke, the heart, the bit of pure SpongeBob nonsense planted right in the middle of the most important moment in the whole film. The people who replaced it in their minds with a cool rock star guitar accidentally rubbed out the one detail that made the scene feel like SpongeBob in the first place. Their memory handed him something flashy. The movie handed him a peanut, and the peanut somehow carries more warmth than the flashy version ever could. Every so often, the whole thing wakes back up. A new group of people discovers the movie for the first time, or an old clip drifts back around the internet, and a fresh crowd lines up to insist that the guitar was pointy. They argue about it. They go and check. They find the peanut waiting there, same as it has always been. They feel a little dizzy for a moment, a little unsure of their own head. Then the noise dies down and goes quiet again, resting until the next time someone stumbles onto it. The peanut never moves. The memory never fully lets go. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This first puzzle works from the outside. It is a thing people watched with their own eyes and then slowly redrew in their heads over the years until the copy in their memory no longer matched the real one. The next puzzle works from the inside, and it has been hiding in plain sight for more than 20 years. There is a character living in Bikini Bottom who almost everyone sees in nearly every episode. A character whose own name has been quietly telling people the wrong thing about what he truly is. The show gave away the real answer a long time ago. Hardly anybody was paying attention. Section 2. The octopus wearing a squid's name. Picture the house that sits squeezed between SpongeBob's pineapple and Patrick's rock. It looks like one of those big stone heads, the kind with the long face and the heavy brow, tall and grumpy and a little bit fancy. Inside lives the grouchiest neighbor in all of Bikini Bottom. He plays a clarinet badly. He paints pictures of himself. He drags himself to a job he hates and stands behind a register all day, sighing at the sponge and the starfish who somehow think he is their best friend. His name is Squidward, and that name has been quietly lying to people for more than 20 years. Squidward is not a squid. He is an octopus. A full, complete octopus, confirmed by the man who made him, sitting right there in the open for anyone who bothered to look. The name says squid. The creature is an octopus, and almost nobody noticed for the longest time because the name does such a good job of pointing everyone in the wrong direction. The reason the name works as a trick is that it sounds so obviously correct. Squidward. The word squid is right there at the front of it, plain as day. When something has the word squid stamped onto the very start of its name, the brain does not stop to question it. It just files the creature away under squid and moves on. There is no reason to look closer. The name already gave the answer, or at least it seemed to. A quick look at the actual animals shows how the mix-up holds together so easily. A real squid and a real octopus are cousins. They both live in the ocean. They both have soft, squishy bodies. They both have those long, bendy arms, and to a person who is not studying them carefully, they can look like roughly the same sort of thing. The biggest plain difference is the count. A real octopus has 8 arms. A real squid has 10. Beyond that, a squid tends to be longer and more torpedo-shaped, while an octopus has that big round head that puffs out like a balloon. But unless someone is really paying attention, a squid and an octopus blur together into one slippery ocean creature with a bunch of arms, and the brain is happy to leave it at that. So when a cartoon character shows up with the word squid in his name and a bunch of bendy arms hanging off him, the case feels closed before it ever opens. Squid in the name, arms on the body, done. Nobody runs the numbers, nobody counts. The man who created the whole show settled this question himself, on camera, years ago. His name was Steven Hillenburg, and before he ever made cartoons, he studied ocean animals for real, and even taught about them. He knew exactly what a squid was, and exactly what an octopus was. On a special little feature included with the first SpongeBob movie, Hillenburg introduces the grumpy neighbor straight to the audience and calls him Squidward the octopus. Not a squid, an octopus. He even explains why he picked an octopus on purpose. He liked that an octopus has a big, round, puffed up head, and he thought that suited the character perfectly, because Squidward believes he is smart and fancy and better than everyone around him. A big swollen head for a character with a big swollen opinion of himself. The choice was a joke baked right into the design. That same little feature contains a perfect tiny moment that proves the trick was working from the very start. The person sitting with Hillenburg on camera happened to be the son of a famous ocean explorer, a man who knew his sea creatures well. And the moment Hillenburg called Squidward an octopus, the explorer's son spotted the problem right away and pointed it out. He said something close to, but he only has 6 legs, an octopus has 8. Hillenburg's answer was wonderful in how relaxed it was. He admitted he knew that was coming, that he figured someone would catch it, and then he simply explained the real reason. So even there, in the very moment the creator was confirming the truth, the contradiction was sitting right on the table. An expert looked at Squidward and instantly saw that the arms did not match the animal. Most viewers never did, because most viewers never had an ocean expert sitting next to them counting. That leaves one obvious problem, and it is the same problem problem that lets the whole trick survive. Squidward does not have 8 arms. Anyone who watches the show and counts will only ever find 6. 2 arms up top that he uses like hands, and 4 down below that he walks around on. 6 total. And a real octopus, the kind Hillenburg studied, is supposed to have 8. There is an answer for that too, and it is wonderfully simple. Hillenburg explained that drawing a character with 8 separate arms over and over in thousands and thousands of little hand-drawn frames would have been a giant pain. 6 was easier, 6 was faster, 6 let the animators move him around without losing their minds. So they gave him 6 and called it close enough. It was a choice made to save work, not a clue about his species. He is still an octopus. He is just an octopus drawn with 2 fewer arms because somebody had to draw those arms by hand a million times. There is even a tiny bit of proof tucked inside the show that backs all this up. Squidward almost always has 6 arms, but there are 2 rare moments across the entire series where he suddenly shows up with the full set of 8. One is a short live-action style bit in an early episode. The other is a quick moment many years later in a much later season. 2 times out of hundreds and hundreds of episodes, the curtain slips and the real number peeks through. The rest of the time, 6. It is like the show quietly admitting, just twice, what it had been hiding the whole way along. Hillenburg thought about leaning into the octopus truth in another way too, and then backed off. And the reason is one of the funniest small facts in the whole show. Real octopuses can squirt out a cloud of dark ink to escape danger. Hillenburg toyed with the idea of having Squidward shoot ink the way a real octopus would. He dropped it because every time they tried it, the squirting ink made it look like Squidward was having an accident in his pants. So a perfectly accurate, perfectly real octopus ability got cut from the character because it read as something embarrassing instead of something cool. Once again, the team looked at the real, correct, true-to-life option and walked away from it the second it stopped being funny in the right way. Now back to that name. If Hillenburg knew the character was an octopus, and he clearly did, why on earth would he name him Squidward, with squid sitting right there at the front? The answer is that the name was never really about getting the species right. It was about the way the word sounded. Squidward is built out of 2 pieces. Take the word squid, glue it to the name Edward, and you get Squidward. It rolls off the tongue. It sounds like a real grumpy fussy man's name with a sea creature twist on it. It is funny in the mouth. The voice actor who has played Squidward since the very beginning, a man named Roger Bumpass, helped make this point in the plainest way possible. He pointed out that the obvious correct version of the name, the one that would have actually matched an octopus, simply did not work. Octoward. Say it out loud. Octoward. It thuds. It sounds clumsy and wrong and not funny at all. Squidward sings. Octoward sinks. So the team kept the name that sounded good and let the species quietly disagree with it. They picked the joke over the textbook. This is exactly the kind of thing that catches a whole crowd of people off guard all at once. When the truth finally spreads, the reaction is almost always the same. People feel a little stunned, a little betrayed, a little silly. They have watched this character their entire life. They have quoted him, laughed at him, felt sorry for him, and the whole time they had his basic identity filed under the wrong heading, fooled by 4 little letters at the front of his name. It is the kind of fact that makes a person go quiet for a second and rethink something they were completely sure they knew. It belongs to that same family of shared wrong memories as the peanut guitar, though it works a little differently. The guitar is something people saw clearly and then slowly repainted in their heads over the years. The Squidward mix-up is something people were nudged into from the very start, gently steered wrong by a name that did the steering. With the guitar, the brain swaps a real picture for an expected one. With Squidward, the brain never even gets a real picture to begin with because the name hands it a false label before it has a chance to look. Both end the same way though. A giant group of people, all certain, all wrong, all surprised together when the truth shows up. What makes the Squidward case feel deeper than a simple gotcha is what the character is actually doing in the show, and how perfectly the octopus choice fits him. Squidward wants to be seen as a great artist. He believes deep down that he is special, that he was born for finer things, that the world simply failed to notice his genius. He plays his clarinet for an audience of nobody. He paints painting after painting of his own face. He carries himself like a man who deserves applause and keeps not getting any. That big round puffed up octopus head, the very thing Hillenburg picked on purpose, is the visual joke for all of it. A swollen head for a swollen sense of self. The design is making fun of him gently every single second he is on screen, and most people never clock the joke because they were too busy thinking he was a squid. There is something a little sad sitting under the comedy too, which is part of why the character has stuck with people for so long. Squidward is the one resident of Bikini Bottom who clearly wants more than the life he has. SpongeBob is happy flipping patties. Patrick is happy doing nothing at all. Mr. Krabs is happy counting his coins. Squidward is the one who looks around at his small house and his dull job and his cheerful, annoying neighbors and aches for something bigger and better and finer. He almost never gets it. The show keeps reaching toward that ache and then pulling back to the next joke, and the design quietly tells the whole story before he even speaks, because a creature built around a big proud head is a creature built to be disappointed by a world that refuses to treat him as special. The species mix-up also fits a a pattern that runs all through the show once a person starts looking. SpongeBob is named after a kitchen sponge, the squishy yellow kind people use to wash dishes, even though a real sea sponge looks nothing like that. Sandy is a squirrel living underwater in a glass dome, which makes no real sense at all. Mr. Krabs has only 2 legs when a real crab has far more. Gary, SpongeBob's pet snail, meows exactly like a house cat and is treated like one, even though snails do not meow and are nothing like cats. Pearl, Mr. Krabs' own daughter, is a whale despite having a crab for a father, which makes no biological sense at all and never gets explained. The whole town is stuffed with creatures who bend the rules of what they are supposed to be, because the show was never trying to be a science lesson, it was trying to be funny and warm and a little strange. Squidward being an octopus with a squid's name and an animator-friendly arm count is not a slip-up. It is the show being exactly what it always was, picking the version that felt right over the version that was technically correct. And the man who made all these choices, Steven Hillenburg, did know the correct versions. That is the part that ties it all together. He was not a person guessing about sea creatures. He had studied them and taught about them. He could have made Squidward a perfectly accurate squid with 10 arms and a long body. He chose not to. He chose the bulbous octopus head because it told the joke about the character's pride. He chose the squiddy-sounding name because it landed better than the accurate one. He chose 6 arms because 8 was a nightmare to draw. Every single one of those choices puts the laugh and the feeling ahead of the fact. And that is the whole reason the show works. A version of SpongeBob built around being scientifically correct would have been forgettable. A version built around big round heads and silly names and easy to draw arms became something people carry with them for the rest of their lives. So the name keeps right on doing its quiet work. New people find the show all the time. Kids meet Squidward for the first time and file him away under Squid, same as everyone before them, because the name tells them to, and the name is the first thing they get. Years later, some of them stumble onto the truth and feel that little jolt of surprise, that small wobble in something they were sure about. Then they go back to watching, and the next batch of new viewers starts the whole cycle over again. The octopus stands behind his register, sighing at his neighbors, wearing a squid's name like a coat that does not quite fit, and almost nobody ever notices the coat is wrong. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That is 2 puzzles now that hide behind small, simple things. A guitar that was never the shape people swear it was. A creature that was never the animal his name promised. Both of them sit right out in the open, easy to check, easy to miss. The next one is not a shape or a name. It is a story, a scary little campfire story, told inside the show itself, and it carries a name that hardly anybody can repeat correctly. 2 characters in the show cannot even agree on how to say it, and tangled up in that one ridiculous ghost story is a hidden guest, a creepy old face borrowed from a movie made 100 years ago, the face that ended up becoming the first taste of real horror an entire generation ever got without even knowing it. Section 3. The ghost with a name nobody can say. The Krusty Krab is closed for the night. The chairs are up, the lights are low, and Squidward is finally about to escape and go home. Then a single customer wanders in at the last second, and Mr. Krabs, who can smell a coin from a mile away, gets the worst idea of his life. He decides the restaurant should never close at all. From now on, it stays open every hour of every day. So Squidward and SpongeBob get stuck working the dead middle of the night, the long empty stretch when no normal person is awake, and Squidward decides to pass the time by scaring the daylights out of the sponge. He makes up a ghost story right there on the spot. He invents a monster, a former cook who once worked at that very restaurant, a clumsy fellow who one day chopped his own hand clean off while slicing up the patties. The poor cook screwed a rusty old spatula onto the stump where his hand used to be. Then he got run over by a bus and killed, and to make it worse, he got fired at his own funeral. Now Squidward says, the ghost of that cook comes back every single night to take his revenge on whoever is foolish enough to be working in the dark. This monster needs a name, and Squidward gives him one. The name is the hash-slinging slasher. A hash slinger is just an old-fashioned way of saying a short-order cook, somebody who slings hash, who flips food fast in a busy kitchen. Stick the word slasher on the end, because the thing has a sharp spatula for a hand, and you get the hash-slinging slasher. It is a perfectly good, silly, scary name. It is also, apparently, one of the hardest names in the world to actually say out loud. This is where the trouble starts, and the trouble is the whole point. The moment Squidward says the name, SpongeBob cannot repeat it. His mouth just refuses. He tries again and again, and keeps producing total nonsense instead. He says things like the sash-ringing slasher, the trash thinging, the mash flinging, the flash springing, one garbled attempt after another, each one further from the real thing than the last, while Squidward gets more and more annoyed and keeps correcting him. And here is the strange part that turns this into a puzzle worth talking about. A huge number of people who grew up watching this episode cannot say the name right either. They remember the bit, they remember the monster, they remember the spatula hand and the bus and the spooky 3 signs, but when they try to repeat the actual name, the thing comes out scrambled, exactly the way it came out scrambled for SpongeBob. People go around for years calling it the wrong thing entirely, fully confident they have it right. The reason for that is half clever writing and half the way the human mouth works. The real name is packed with sounds that crash into each other. Hash, sling, slash. 3 chunks that all start with similar sharp hissing sounds and bump together when you try to say them fast. It is built like a tongue twister. Even the people who made the joke knew it was slippery, which is exactly why they had SpongeBob fumble it so badly in the first place. The joke is that the name is hard to say, so when real viewers find it hard to say too, they are not failing. They are doing the exact thing the cartoon was poking fun at. The show predicted the mess, and then everybody walked right into it. This is a softer cousin of the guitar and the octopus, the same family of group-wide mix-ups, but it works on the tongue instead of the eyes. With the guitar, a whole crowd of people see one shape and remember another. With Squidward, a whole crowd gets steered wrong by a name. With the hash-slinging slasher, a whole crowd hears a name clearly and still cannot hold on to it because the name is shaped like a trap. 3 different ways for a big group of people to end up sure and wrong at the same time, all living inside the same yellow cartoon. Now, the actual story Squidward tells is great fun on its own, but the real treasure in this episode is not the monster. It is who shows up at the very end, and almost nobody watching as a kid had any idea what they were looking at. Squidward lays out 3 warning signs that mean the ghost is coming. First, the lights will flicker on and off. Second, the phone will ring, but nobody will be there when you answer. Third, a ghostly bus will pull up and drop the monster off. He makes the whole thing up just to torment SpongeBob. And then, one by one, every single sign starts coming true anyway. The lights flicker. The phone rings with silence on the other end. A bus actually rolls up outside in the dead of night. A dark, shadowy figure climbs off it and shuffles toward the door, and the shape of him matches the monster from the story. SpongeBob and Squidward completely lose it, screaming, certain they are about to die. Then the figure steps into the light, and it turns out to be a normal guy. He is just somebody looking for a job. He explains the phone call was him. He had tried to call earlier, but got nervous and hung up. The scary shape was just the dark playing trick. Mystery solved, sort of. 2 of the 3 signs have a perfectly boring explanation, but there is still one loose thread, and Squidward is the one who spots it. If the nervous job seeker was the one on the phone and the one on the bus, then who was flickering the lights? Everyone turns and looks, and there, calmly flipping the light switch up and down with a creepy little grin on his face, is a tall, pale, bald creature with pointy ears and long claw-like fingers and sharp teeth. The characters all instantly recognize him, somehow, and they shout out his name together. The name they shout is Nosferatu. To a little kid watching at home, this made absolutely no sense, and that was sort of the joke. A weird vampire just appears out of nowhere, flicking a light switch, and the cartoon never explains who he is or why everyone knows him. It is funny because it is so random. A spooky creature drops in for 2 seconds at the end of a ghost story, and then the episode is over. That creature was not made up for the show. He is real, in the sense that he came from a real movie, and a very old one. There is a black and white film from the year 1922, more than 100 years old now, called Nosferatu. It is a silent film, meaning there is no talking in it, just pictures and music and words on the screen. It is one of the oldest vampire movies ever made, and it is famous for being genuinely creepy in a slow, strange, dreamlike way. The vampire in that film is a tall, bald ghoul with those long fingers and pointed ears and that hunched, spooky walk. The actor who played him had a face that looked almost inhuman even without makeup, and the way he moved through that old grainy film has scared people for generation after generation. The SpongeBob crew reached back across 100 years, pulled an actual still image of that ancient movie vampire, and dropped him into the end of a children's cartoon as a throwaway gag. The picture they used was a real frame from the old film. They even gave the old vampire a friendly little smile that was not there in the original, so he would look goofy and harmless instead of terrifying. A tweaked version of a 100-year-old face grinning while he plays with a light switch. One of the writers who worked on the episode explained later how it came together. The team wanted some kind of strange, out-of-nowhere ending to cap off the ghost story, and the picture of that old vampire was already sitting in his head from when he was young. The boss of the whole show, Steven Hillenburg, said yes to the idea, and so a 100-year-old horror movie character ended up making a surprise appearance in a cartoon about a talking sponge. Then comes the part that is genuinely a little amazing. That writer pointed out something that nobody planned, but that turned out to be true on a massive scale. For about 20 years after this episode aired, an enormous number of people had their very first encounter with that famous old movie vampire right here, in this exact 2-second SpongeBob gag. Not in a film class, not in a scary movie marathon, not from their parents showing them an old classic. They met one of the most important monsters in the entire history of horror because a cartoon sponge screamed his name at a light switch. Think about what that actually means. A movie made in 1922, a movie most kids would never sit down and watch on their own, somehow reached straight into the minds of millions of children who were born 70, 80, 90 years after it came out. It reached them sideways, through a joke, in a show about underwater fast food. The old vampire got a second life he was never supposed supposed to have, carried into a brand new century by the silliest possible delivery vehicle. A whole generation now knows that pale grinning face, and a big chunk of them have no idea the face is 100 years old or that it came from one of the most respected scary movies ever made. That writer also mentioned, with a bit of a laugh, that he made one small choice that has gotten him corrected by strangers for years. The characters in the episode shout the name Nosferatu, which is the name of the movie, but the vampire himself, the actual character in the old film, has a different name. So technically the cartoon has everyone shouting the title of the film instead of the monster's real name. The writer picked the word Nosferatu on purpose because more people would recognize it and because it simply sounded better shouted out loud. Ever since, people who know the old movie keep popping up to tell him he got the name technically wrong. He knew. He chose the catchier word anyway. The same way the show chose Squidward over Octoward. The same way it chose a peanut guitar over a cool one. The version that sounds and feels right beats the version that is technically correct every single time, all through this show. So this one episode quietly does two big things at once. It hands a whole generation a name they will mangle for the rest of their lives. A ghost so tongue-twisting that the cartoon itself made a joke out of how hard it is to say. And in the very same handful of minutes, it slips a real piece of ancient movie history into children's minds without anyone realizing a lesson just happened. The hash-slinging slasher and the 100-year-old vampire riding into a new century together on a ghost bus in a closed restaurant at 3 in the morning. There is a strange beauty in how harmless it all looks from the outside. A simple spooky bit at the end of a simple episode. Underneath it sits a careful little machine, a name engineered to be impossible to repeat, and a face quietly chosen to outlive everyone who first laughed at it. The show keeps doing this. It keeps hiding bigger things inside smaller ones, trusting that some of them will stay buried for years and only get noticed long after. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the next thing it hid is the strangest of all, because this time the show did not hide it inside a name or a face. It hid it inside the empty space where something used to be. There are episodes of this cartoon that a lot of people are certain they watched as kids. They can describe them, they can picture them, but if those people go looking for those episodes today, they will find that the episodes are simply gone, pulled out of sight, and very hard to ever watch again. And the reasons they vanished are stranger than any ghost story Squidward could ever make up. Section 4. The episodes that disappeared. There is a particular feeling that comes over people when they go looking for something they are sure they remember, and it simply is not there. They scroll through every episode on the screen, top to bottom, twice, 3 times, certain they must have skipped it somehow. The episode they want is missing, and not the way a thing is missing when you misplace it. Missing the way something is missing when it has been quietly taken away on purpose. A handful of SpongeBob episodes live in exactly that spot now. People remember watching them. They can describe what happened in them. They can sometimes quote the lines. But the episodes have been pulled out of the lineup, lifted off the places where people normally watch the show, and tucked away somewhere most folks can no longer reach. They did not get erased from memory. They got erased from the shelf. And that gap, that empty space where a real episode used to sit, is its own kind of puzzle. One that feels weirdly similar to remembering a guitar wrong, except this time the memory is correct, and it is the world that changed. The most famous of these vanished episodes comes from the 3rd season, an episode all about Mr. Krabs. The story is built around the idea of Mr. Krabs getting older and feeling it. He wakes up grumpy and stiff, his daughter makes fun of how out of touch he is, and the whole thing settles a heavy mood over him. He is the kind of old that feels like the fun parts of life are already behind him, so he latches onto SpongeBob and Patrick and begs to tag along on their idea of a wild night out, hoping a little of their energy will rub off and make him feel young again. For most of the episode, this is sweet and harmless. SpongeBob and Patrick have the tamest notion of a wild night imaginable, full of childish little games, and poor Mr. Krabs keeps waiting for the real excitement to start. He gets fed up and is about to give up and go home, and then Patrick drops the line that the whole episode is now remembered for. He suggests they go do something that involves sneaking into a stranger's house to steal underwear. That is the moment the episode turned into a problem. The 3 of them actually go and break into a house and take a woman's underwear. It plays out as a goofy little adventure in the cartoon, the way everything plays out in this show, but the basic idea sitting underneath it is 3 characters breaking into someone's home to steal their private thing. There is a soft landing at the end, where it turns out the house belongs to Mr. Krabs' own mother, and she catches them and sends him to his childhood bedroom like a naughty kid. The ending is gentle. The setup, looking back at it years later, made a lot of people deeply uncomfortable. For a long time, the episode just aired like any other. It was on television, it was on the discs, kids watched it, nobody at the company seemed to think much of it. Then, around the year 2018, the people who run the show took a hard look at it during a review of their own content, decided that some of what happened in it was not right for kids, and quietly pulled it out of rotation. They stopped airing it. They eventually took it off the places online where people stream the show, and when reporters later asked the company about it, a spokesperson confirmed the basic story story plainly. The episode had been out of rotation since 2018, following a review that found some of its story elements were not appropriate for children. When asked exactly which scenes caused the trouble, or whether they had thought about just slapping a warning on it instead of pulling it, the company mostly declined to say more. So now, there is a whole episode of one of the most watched cartoons on Earth that you basically cannot watch through the normal doors anymore. It flickered back into view for a short stretch at one point, briefly available again, and then it vanished once more when the company changed its mind. It bounced in and out of sight a little, which only made the whole thing feel stranger. People who remembered it from childhood would go to show it to someone and find it simply was not there, and they would start to wonder if they had imagined the whole thing. That episode is not alone. There is at least one more SpongeBob episode that got pulled, and the reason behind that one is almost spooky in how the timing worked out. This second episode comes from much later in the show's life, from the 12th season, and it is built around a sickness spreading through Bikini Bottom. In the story, the health inspector discovers a disease at the Krusty Krab, something the show calls the clam flu, and the whole restaurant gets locked down. Everyone inside is trapped, stuck together, unable to leave, with the people who might be sick getting shut away from the rest. That episode was finished and ready to air. And then the real world did something nobody planned for. A genuine sickness swept across the entire planet, and suddenly real people everywhere found themselves locked down, trapped inside, kept apart from one another, told to stay home, frightened of catching something they could not see. A cartoon about a town getting shut down over a spreading illness, ready to go right at the moment the whole world was living through a spreading illness, was simply too close to home. The company decided not to air it. A spokesperson said straight out that the episode centered on a virus storyline and that they had chosen not to show it because of the sensitivity around the real-world sickness happening at the time. That second episode is a different kind of strange than the first. The underwear one got pulled because people looked back at it and decided it was not okay for kids. The sickness one got pulled, not because anything in it was wrong, but because the world outside the cartoon suddenly caught up to it in the worst possible way. A perfectly normal episode became unwatchable, not for what it contained, but for what was happening everywhere else at the exact moment it was supposed to come out. It is a reminder that a cartoon does not live in a sealed bubble. It lives in the same world as the people watching it, and sometimes that world reaches in and changes what a show is allowed to be. Here is where this whole thing folds back into the bigger idea running through all of this. The disappearing episodes carry that same dizzy feeling as the guitar and the octopus and the ghost with the twisty name, but it comes from the opposite direction. With the guitar, people are sure of something and they are wrong. With these episodes, people are sure of something and they are completely right, and the world has simply moved the proof out of reach. Someone remembers the underwear episode clearly, goes to find it, and cannot. That gap between a solid real memory and an empty spot on the screen plays a trick on the mind that feels almost identical to a false memory, even though it is the reverse. The memory is true, it is the shelf that lied, and that gap is exactly the kind of soil where wild stories grow. When a real episode goes missing, and the company will not fully explain why, people fill the silence themselves. They trade theories, they argue about which scenes really got it pulled, they hunt down old copies, they make videos pointing at the empty space where the episode used to be. A missing episode becomes more talked about, in a way, than it ever was when it just sat quietly in the lineup like everything else. Taking something away can make people want it more, and wonder about it harder than they ever did when it was sitting right in front of them, ignored. It is worth being clear and fair about what actually happened here, because this topic attracts a lot of nonsense. There are countless made-up stories floating around about supposed lost or banned or cursed SpongeBob episodes, scary tales people invent for fun, episodes that never existed at all. Most of what gets passed around under the banner of Forbidden SpongeBob is pure fiction. The two episodes covered here are different. They are real. They aired or were finished and scheduled. Real reporters asked the real company about them, and the real company answered on the record about why they were pulled. There is a solid, boring, true story behind each one, and the true story is interesting enough that it does not need any ghost story dressed on top of it. There is also something quietly revealing in the fact that these episodes got pulled at all. SpongeBob has always carried a streak of humor that flew a little over the heads of the kids watching, and landed instead with the grown-ups in the room. A lot of the show's jokes work on two levels, an innocent one for children and a slightly sharper one for adults. For years, that double layer was treated as part of the show's charm. The underwear episode came from that exact instinct. A joke pushed a step too far in a direction that seemed fine at the time and looked very different years later. The company pulling it is the show's own keepers looking back at their work and deciding the standards had changed, that something which passed without much thought in one decade did not sit right in the next. A cartoon that has been on the air for more than 20 years is going to have moments like that, where the world grows up around it and a few old jokes stop fitting. So the disappearing episodes leave behind a strange little monument made of nothing, an empty slot, a gap in the list, a memory with no episode attached to it anymore. People who live through the show in real time carry pieces of something the official record has quietly folded away, and the only proof left is sitting in their own heads and in a few old discs gathering dust in closets. The show goes on, hundreds of episodes deep, bright and loud and everywhere, while a couple of its own chapters sit locked in a back room nobody can quite get into. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. All of this so far has lived inside the show, or just behind it. A guitar in a movie, a creature and his name, a ghost story and a borrowed face, a few episodes lifted off the shelf. The next thing reaches further out than any of that. It steps right out of the cartoon entirely and lands in the real ocean, in a real place, with a real and heavy history attached to it. Because the name of the town these characters live in, the cheerful little underwater city where all of this nonsense happens, was borrowed from a real spot on the map. And what happened at that real spot is one of the most serious things a place can be remembered for, which raises a strange and uncomfortable question about what kind of ground SpongeBob's whole happy world is actually built on top of. Section 5, the real place under the cartoon. Every episode of SpongeBob opens the same way. A booming pirate voice calls out, asking if you are ready, and then the song begins. Somewhere in that opening, before the camera dives down beneath the waves, there is a flash of an island sitting up top, a little ring of land poking out of a wide blue ocean. The show never makes a big deal of it. It is just the surface, the world above water, the place the camera drops down from to reach the bright town below. Most people watching never gave that island a single thought. That island has a name, and the town beneath it borrows that name directly. The town is called Bikini Bottom. The real place it is named after is called Bikini Atoll, and the bottom in Bikini Bottom is simply the idea that the town sits down at the bottom of the water, underneath that ring of land floating above. The cheerful underwater city took its name from a real spot in the real ocean, a small ring of islands far out in the Pacific, thousands of miles from almost anywhere. An atoll, by the way, is just a ring-shaped chain of little islands made of coral, usually with a calm pool of water in the middle. Bikini Atoll is one of those. It is a real place, sitting out in a part of the ocean called the Marshall Islands, a long way from any big country. For most of its history, it was a quiet, sleepy paradise, home to a small community of people who lived off the land and the sea around them. Sun, sand, fish, calm water, the kind of place that looks like a postcard. Then, after a giant war ended in the 1940s, that quiet ring of islands got chosen for something terrible. The people who lived there were told they had to leave. They were promised it was important, that it was for the good of everyone, that they could come back later. So they packed up and were moved away from the only home they had ever known. And once the islands were empty of people, the testing began. What got tested there were bombs. Not ordinary bombs, the most powerful and destructive weapons human beings have ever built, the kind that level entire islands and poison the ground and water for lifetimes. Over a stretch of years, from the late 1940s through the late 1950s, a long string of these enormous bombs were set off at Bikini Atoll. Some were dropped from the air, some were placed on the water. At least one was set off underwater, deep below the surface, sending up a tower of sea and smoke. Each one was a small act of destruction so large it is genuinely hard to picture. The damage did not pack up and leave when the testing stopped. The blasts reshaped the land and left the place soaked in invisible poison, the kind that lingers in the soil and the water and the living things for a very long time. The people who had been moved away were promised they could return, and that promise broke. The islands were left unsafe to live on. Growing food there became dangerous. Fishing there became dangerous. The community that had lived there for generations was scattered, sent to other islands that could not properly support them, and many of their descendants have never been able to go home. They paid an enormous price in their health and their land and their whole way of life for tests they never asked for on islands that were there. That is the real, heavy, true history sitting underneath the name of a children's cartoon town. The bright, happy underwater city where a sponge flips burgers and a starfish naps under a rock is named after one of the most haunting places in the modern world. And once a person knows that, it is genuinely hard to look at the opening of the show the same way again. Now the obvious question, the one that has launched 1,000 late-night theories, is whether the show meant anything serious by this. Was the cartoon quietly telling people that all those talking sea creatures, the sponge and the squid and the starfish and the rest, are actually the result of those bombs? That the radiation from all that testing leaked into the water and twisted ordinary sea animals into the walking, talking, blinking citizens of Bikini Bottom? It is a tidy theory. It connects the dots in a satisfying, slightly spooky way. A poisoned real place, a cartoon town named after it, and a population of creatures that are very much not normal. It almost writes itself. Here is where honesty matters, because this is exactly the kind of spot where a good story can run past the actual fact. The name being borrowed from the real place is solid and true. The man who made the show studied the ocean for real, knew his geography, and chose a real ocean location for his made-up town. The island in the opening really does point back to that real ring of islands. That part is not a guess. The town is genuinely named after a real place with a real and serious history. The part where the bombs turned the sea creatures into the talking cartoon characters is a different different thing entirely. That is a fan theory. It is something viewers came up with on their own, looking at the name and the history and the strangeness of the characters and stitching it together into an origin story the show never actually told. And the people who made the show have not all agreed on it. Some have brushed it off. One of the show's own voice actors described the underwater town as its own separate world, almost like another planet, the kind of place where the normal rules just do not apply and you are not supposed to ask too many questions. That is not a man confirming a dark secret origin. That is a man saying it is a cartoon and the cartoon makes its own rules. But it gets more tangled because not everyone connected to the show has waved the theory away. One of the people who both writes for the show and voices a character has, in an interview, leaned into the idea, playing with the notion that the town really is sitting on top of that test site and treating it as part of the fun of building the world. He even pushed it further into a much darker direction, suggesting the world up above the water is gone and the underwater town is all that is left. And that is the moment the theory falls apart against the show itself, because the show flatly disagrees with that darker version. Real human beings show up in the cartoon now and then. A man in a small boat appears in one early episode, dropping a pencil down into the water. Humans turn up in the movies. There is a whole recurring pirate character, played by the same man who voices SpongeBob, who is plainly a living person up on the surface. The world above water is clearly still there, so the grim idea that everything up top is dead does not hold, no matter who floated it. This leaves the truth in a more interesting and more honest place than either extreme. The name is real and deliberate. The history behind that name is real and serious. The theory that the bombs created the characters is a clever thing fans built, never something the show carefully laid out as its true backstory. And the people who made the show have given mixed and even contradicting answers about it. The most a careful person can say is that the creator picked a real, weighty location for his cartoon town, and that the strange link between a poisoned real place and a town full of impossible creatures has been catnip for theory makers ever since, with the show's own crew sometimes playing along and sometimes shrugging it off. What makes this whole thing land the way it does is the size of the gap between the two halves. On one side, the silliest, gentlest, most harmless cartoon ever made, a show whose entire job is to make small children laugh and feel safe. On the other side, a name pointing straight at one of the saddest and most serious chapters of recent history, a place where real people lost their homes and their health for tests they never wanted. Those two things should not fit together. They sit at opposite ends of everything, and yet the cartoon quietly carries that name in its title and its theme song, day after day, episode after episode, while almost nobody watching feels the weight of it at all. There is a strange respect, maybe even an accident of respect, buried in that choice. The man who made the show loved the ocean. He spent real years studying it and teaching people about it before he ever drew a cartoon. Whether or not he meant the name to carry all that history, he reached for a real piece of the real sea when he built his pretend one. He could have made up any name in the world. He could have called the town anything. He pulled a genuine spot off the map, one tied to the ocean he loved and to a real human story, and he planted his bright, silly world right on top of it. Most viewers will live their whole lives loving this show and never know the ground it stands on. And that is the quiet power of this one. It is not a trick of memory like the guitar. It is not a clever joke like the octopus or the ghost. It is a real place, a real history, hiding in plain hearing inside a song millions of people have heard thousands of times. The information was never hidden at all. It was sung out loud in the theme. The name was on the screen the whole time. People simply never stopped to look up what it meant, because why would anyone go digging into the dark history of the ocean while watching a sponge laugh at a jellyfish? The seriousness was always there. It just sat politely behind the silliness, waiting, the way the deep ocean sits quietly under a bright and busy surface. So the show keeps doing its thing. The pirate voice booms out the question. The song plays. The little island flashes by up top, the way it always has, holding a history almost nobody in the audience can feel. And the camera drops down past it into the bright town below, where the real weight of that name is left behind at the surface, and everything turns warm and goofy again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Up to now, almost everything has lived in the made-up world or in the real ground beneath it. A movie, a character, a story, some pulled episodes, a borrowed name. The next thing is different because it walks straight off the screen and into the lives of the actual people who built the show. There is a character in Bikini Bottom whose name was taken from someone real, someone the creator loved, and the voice behind that character belongs to the real wife of another man deep inside the show. Two real marriages quietly folded into a cartoon about a sponge in a way that turns one small computer screen on a wall into the most personal thing in the entire series. Section 6. The love story. Hidden in a computer. Across the street from the Krusty Krab sits a small, sad, mostly empty restaurant called the Chum Bucket. It almost never has any customers. The food is terrible. The whole place is run by a tiny green creature named Plankton, who is roughly the size of a fingernail and who spends every waking moment of his life scheming to steal the secret recipe from the much more successful successful restaurant across the road. He is the villain of the show, in a small and pitiful sort of way, more of a nuisance than a real threat. He fails constantly. He gets stepped on, flicked away, laughed at, and beaten almost every single time he tries something. Plankton is not alone in that little restaurant though. He has a partner, a computer. She lives on the wall, a flat screen with a single glowing green line that wiggles when she speaks. In the earliest days of the show, she was barely a character at all, just a machine Plankton talked to while he plotted, a tool for spitting out evil plans. Over the years, she grew into something much bigger. She became smart, sharp, funny, and more than a little tired of her husband, because that is what she is. She is Plankton's wife. The tiny green villain is married to the computer on his wall, and the two of them bicker and scheme and stay together the way an old married couple does, even though one of them is a bug and the other is a screen. Her name is Karen. That name is where the real story starts, the one that has nothing to do with the cartoon and everything to do with the people who made it. Karen the computer was named after a real woman named Karen, the wife of the man who created the entire show. The creator gave his villain's robot wife the same name as his own actual wife in real life. He took the most personal thing a person has, the name of the woman he loved and was married to, and he quietly handed it to a character in his cartoon. That alone would be a sweet little fact. The creator liked his wife's name enough to put it into his show, but it goes deeper than just the name, because of why he picked her for that particular character. He once described his real wife as the funniest person he knew, and he said her sharp, teasing sense of humor was the thing that shaped the cartoon Karen's whole personality. So the computer on the wall is not just borrowing a real woman's name, she is borrowing a real woman's wit. When Karen rolls her eyes at Plankton, when she fires off a dry little jab at her ridiculous husband, when she is clearly the smarter half of the pair, that spark traces straight back to a real marriage and a real woman the creator found genuinely funny. He built a character around the way his own wife made him laugh. There is one more layer to this, and it is the layer that makes the whole thing almost unbelievably tidy. The plan, at first, was for the real Karen to actually do the voice. The creator wanted his real wife to be the voice of the character named after her. It was going to be a complete loop, the real woman lending her name, her humor, and her actual voice to the cartoon version of herself. It did not happen, and the reason it did not happen is wonderfully human. On the day she was supposed to record her lines, the real Karen got so nervous standing there ready to speak that she could not get a single word out. Not one. The nerves locked her up completely, so the part had to go to somebody else. And here is where the second marriage folds in. The someone else who got the job, the woman whose voice you actually hear coming out of that computer on the wall, is a woman named Jill Talley. Jill Talley is married, in real life, to the man who voices SpongeBob himself. The actor behind the cheerful yellow sponge and the actress behind the villain's computer wife are husband and wife in the real world. Stack all of that up and look at what is sitting inside one small character on a wall. The name comes from the creator's real wife. The personality and the humor come from that same real wife, and the voice comes from the real wife of the lead actor. Two separate real marriages, two real couples from the world outside the show, are quietly braided together inside a single character that most people watching treat as a throwaway gag. A computer that exists mostly to give a tiny villain someone to argue with turns out to be the most personal, most human, most love-soaked thing in the entire series, and almost nobody watching ever knew. The beauty of this is how completely buried it is. Karen is not a main character in the way SpongeBob or Patrick are. For years, she sat on that wall as little more than a device, a screen that handed Plankton his next bad idea. A casual viewer would never guess there was anything underneath her. She looks like the least personal thing imaginable. A machine, a prop, a piece of furniture with a voice. And that machine is carrying more real-life love and real-life connection than any other character in the show. The creator put his marriage into the wall of the villain's restaurant. The lead actor's marriage ended up speaking through the same screen. The most heartfelt thing in the cartoon is disguised as a computer, because nobody thought to look for warmth in a computer. It also quietly changes how Karen and Plankton read once a person knows the backstory. On the surface, they are a joke couple, a bug and a screen, a failing villain and the machine that has to put up with him. But the show, especially as it went on, started treating them more and more like a real married pair. They tease each other. They get on each other's nerves. She is plainly smarter than he is, and plainly knows it. He needs her far more than he would ever admit. There are moments where, underneath all the evil scheming, they actually seem to care about one another in the worn-down, familiar way of two people who have been together a long time. That tenderness did not come from nowhere. It came from the fact that the character was born out of a real marriage, sketched from a real woman the creator loved and found funny. The realness leaked into the writing. A couple built on a true couple ended up feeling true. There is something gentle in the choice too. The creator could have named the smart, capable, beloved character after his wife. Instead, he named the villain's wife after her, the computer married to the most pathetic creature in Bikini Bottom. That might sound like an odd kind of tribute, but it reads as a soft inside joke between two people who clearly like to make each other laugh. He did not put her on a pedestal. He put her in the joke, gave her the sharpest lines, made her the clever one stuck with the silly one, and let her be funny. For a man who said his wife was the funniest person he knew, sticking her humor inside a character who gets to be wittier than everyone around her feels like exactly the right kind of love. It is affection shaped like a joke, which is its own honest kind of affection. The detail about the real Karen freezing up at the recording session adds a last touch of something real and a little tender. Picture it. A person is offered the chance to be the voice of a character carrying her own name, written with her own sense of humor, in a show her husband poured himself into. She stands ready to do it, and the nerves simply win. She cannot speak. It is such an ordinary, human thing to happen, the kind of stage fright anybody might feel, and it quietly opened the door for the other real wife to step in and take the role. One marriage handed over the name and the spirit. The other marriage supplied the voice, almost by accident, because the first one got too nervous to talk. The whole thing came together out of love and luck and a case of cold feet. None of this is the kind of secret the show ever tried to hide on purpose. It is just the kind of thing that lives in the credit and the interviews, in the quiet background of how a show actually gets made, the parts most viewers never go looking for. People watch for the jokes and the characters. They are not usually thinking about whose real wife named which character or whose real husband voices the sponge, so the love story sits there in plain sight, baked right into a character who appears in episode after episode, and it stays invisible to almost everyone, not because it is locked away, but because nobody thinks to look behind a computer screen for a marriage. This one is different in flavor from everything that came before it. The guitar was a trick of memory. The octopus was a trick of a name. The ghost was a clever joke, and the borrowed island name carried a heavy real history. Those were puzzles and surprises and uncomfortable truths. This is something warmer. This is two real couples quietly leaving their fingerprints all over a cartoon, turning a silly side character into a tiny monument to the people who made the show. It is proof that even in the most ridiculous corners of Bikini Bottom, in the empty restaurant across from the Krusty Krab, real human love managed to sneak its way in and take up residence inside a machine. It says something about the whole show, really. SpongeBob can look from the outside like pure nonsense, a bright, loud cartoon about a sponge with no deeper layers worth digging into. And then you find a thing like Karen, and you realize the people making it were folding their actual lives into it the entire time. Their marriages, their senses of humor, the names of the people they loved. The show was personal in ways that never showed up on the surface, made by people who cared enough to hide pieces of themselves inside the jokes. A cartoon built with that much real life in it was always going to feel like more than nonsense, even to people who could never quite say why. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That idea that the creator kept pouring real pieces of himself into the show leads straight into the next thing, because Karen is not the only character built out of his real life. There is a whole restaurant in this show, the most important building in the entire series, the place where so much of the story happens, and both the building itself and the grumpy boss who runs it were pulled directly out of a real job the creator worked as a young man, long before he ever dreamed of cartoons. The shape of that famous restaurant has been quietly telling people what it really is for over 20 years, and once again, hardly anybody ever noticed. Section 7. The restaurant that was always a trap. There is one building in this show that matters more than any other. Not the pineapple, not the stone head where the octopus lives, not the rock the starfish sleeps under. The building that holds the whole story together is the Krusty Krab. The little restaurant where SpongeBob cooks, where Squidward stands miserably behind the register, where Mr. Krabs counts his money, and where the famous secret burger gets made. More of the show happens inside that one building than anywhere else. It is the beating heart of Bikini Bottom. Picture it from the outside. It is a squat wooden building with a curved top, sitting low to the ground, with windows along the front and a big sign out front shaped like a clam. It has a homemade, thrown together look, like somebody built it out of old boards and bits of the sea. For more than 20 years, viewers have looked at that building thousands of times without ever once wondering what its shape was supposed to be. It was just the restaurant, just the place, the background to a million jokes. That building is shaped like a trap, a lobster trap to be exact. A lobster trap is a real thing that real fishermen use. It is a wooden cage, low and rounded on top, that gets dropped down into the ocean to catch lobsters. The lobster crawls in through an opening, drawn by bait, and then cannot find its way back out. It is a simple, old, clever device, the kind that fishermen along certain coasts have used for generations. And it has a very particular shape, a humped wooden box with that rounded top. Once a person sees a lobster trap sitting next to a picture of the Krusty Krab, the resemblance is impossible to unsee. The curved wooden top, the boxy body, the whole low humped shape of it. The restaurant is a lobster trap. It always was. The man who made the show built it that way on purpose. The whole town runs on an ocean theme, and a lobster trap is about as ocean as a building can get, so he gave his most important restaurant the shape of one. It fit the world. It looked right sitting down there on the seafloor, and it carried a quiet little joke for anyone who ever noticed, because of what a lobster trap actually does. A lobster trap is a thing that lures a creature inside with the promise of food and then will not let it leave. Now think think about who works inside the Krusty Krab. Think about Squidward, who hates his job, who drags himself there day after day, who dreams of being somewhere better, doing something finer, and who never manages to escape. Think about SpongeBob, so happy to be there that he cannot imagine wanting anything else, cheerfully trapped by his own joy. Think about how Mr. Krabs uses the place, how he squeezes every coin out of it and out of the people in it. The most important building in the show is shaped like a thing built to catch something and keep it from getting out. The workers walk in every morning, lured by a paycheck or by pure love of the work, and somehow never quite leave. The shape is telling the truth about the place. It just never said it out loud. That on its own would be a neat little design secret. But the Krusty Krab goes deeper than that, because the whole restaurant and the grumpy boss who runs it came straight out of the real life of the man who created the show, from a job he actually worked long before cartoons were ever on his mind. Before he made SpongeBob, before he even decided to become an animator, the creator was a young man who needed a summer job, the way lots of young people do. And the job he got was at a seafood restaurant, the kind of place near the coast that serves fish and lobster to hungry customers. He worked there cooking food, flipping and frying, doing the hot, sweaty work of a kitchen. He even boiled lobsters, which is exactly the grim, ordinary task it sounds like. He stood in a real kitchen at a real seafood place and cooked summer after summer as a young man with no idea that any of it would ever matter. Years and years later, when he built Bikini Bottom, he reached back into that memory and pulled the whole thing out. SpongeBob's job, the fry cook standing at the grill making burgers all day, came directly from the creator's own real job standing at a grill cooking food. The cheerful sponge flipping patties is, in a quiet way, the creator himself as a young man, doing the work he once did, just turned yellow and squishy and dropped under the sea. When SpongeBob talks about how much he loves cooking, how proud he is of every patty, how the kitchen is the place he feels most himself, there is a real young cook somewhere behind that, a real person who once stood over a real grill. The boss came from real life too, and this part is even better. Mr. Krabs, the money-obsessed crab who owns the restaurant, was based on a real person, the creator's actual manager at that seafood job. The man who ran that real kitchen left enough of an impression that, decades later, he got turned into one of the most famous cartoon characters in the world. So when Mr. Krabs barks orders, when he runs his little kingdom of a restaurant with an iron claw, when he treats the place like it is the most important spot on earth, there is a real boss from a real seafood joint living somewhere underneath him. The creator did add one thing to the character that was not from real life. He gave Mr. Krabs his famous obsession with money, his desperate, almost cartoonish love of every single coin. The creator said plainly that he added the greedy part on purpose, to give the character more personality, to make him funnier and sharper and more alive. So Mr. Krabs is a mix. The body and the bossiness and the kitchen kingdom came from a real manager the creator once worked for. The wild money hunger was an extra spice the creator stirred in to make the character pop. A real person plus a funny exaggeration blended into a crab. Look at what that means for the whole restaurant. The building is shaped like a real lobster trap, a real piece of ocean fishing gear. The fry cook is doing the creator's real old job. The boss is based on the creator's real old manager. Krusty Krab is not just a made-up place. It is a memory. It is a young man's summer job. The heat and the grease and the bossy manager and the smell of seafood. All of it caught and kept and turned into the center of a cartoon. The creator took the most ordinary thing imaginable, a teenager's part-time kitchen job, and he built his entire show's beating heart out of it. There is one more small piece that shows just how carefully the creator thought about this place, right down to its name. The restaurant is called the Krusty Krab, spelled with 2 big letter K sounds at the front of each word, but that is not how it started out in his head. When he first came up with it, he spelled it the normal way, the correct way, the way the actual words are spelled. Then, before the show really got going, he changed both letters to K on purpose. He decided that the K sound was simply funnier, that it landed better, that it stuck in the mind more than the proper spelling would have. So he broke the spelling on purpose to make the name funnier to look at and say. That tiny choice is the same instinct that runs through this whole show, the one that keeps coming up. The octopus got a squid-sounding name because it was funnier than the correct one. The old vampire got called by the title of his movie instead of his real name because it sounded better. And now the restaurant got its words deliberately misspelled because the wrong spelling was funnier than the right one. Over and over, the people making this show looked at the correct, proper, accurate option and chose the funnier one instead. That is practically the rulebook of the entire series, written small inside a restaurant's name. Knowing all this changes how the Krusty Krab feels. It stops being just a background and starts being a kind of love letter. The creator clearly carried that old summer job around with him for years. A lot of people would rather forget a hot, grease-filled teenage kitchen job and the bossy manager who ran it. He did the opposite. He kept it, turned it warm, and made it the home base of a show that millions of people adore. The frustration of the work became SpongeBob's joy. The bossy manager became a lovable, greedy crab. The whole grind of it got softened and brightened and turned into something people happily come back to again and again. He took an ordinary, maybe even unpleasant slice of his own past and remade it into one of the most beloved fictional places ever drawn. There is something quietly hopeful in that. It means a person can take the small, dull, forgettable parts of their own life, the summer jobs and the annoying bosses and the boring hours, and turn them into something that outlives everything. The creator did not have a grand or glamorous starting point. He had a kitchen job at a seafood place and a manager who stuck in his memory. From that small, plain seed grew a restaurant that the whole world knows, a place as famous in its own way as any real restaurant on earth. The Krusty Krab proves that the material for something huge can come from the most ordinary corner of a life, if the person carrying it cares enough to remake it. And the lobster trap shape ties it all together so neatly, it almost feels too perfect. A trap is a thing that catches and keeps. The restaurant catches its workers and keeps them, the way a job catches a person and keeps them coming back. But the creator was also caught and kept by that real old job, in a different way, because it never left him. It lived in his head for decades, until he finally let it out into a cartoon. The memory trapped him as surely as any lobster trap, and he turned that trap into the heart of his greatest work. The building is honest about what it is. It is a trap. It caught a teenager's summer job and never let it go, and the whole world is better for it. So the most important building in Bikini Bottom turns out to be the most personal one too, hidden behind a shape nobody examined and a name spelled wrong on purpose. People have watched SpongeBob clock in at that restaurant thousands of times, watched Squidward groan behind the register, watched Mr. Krabs hoard his coins, and never once realized they were looking at a young man's real memory dressed up in cartoon colors. The trap was always there in the open. The real job was always cooked into every scene. The truth sat right on the seafloor, low and humped and wooden, waiting for somebody to notice it was a trap all along. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. By now, a clear pattern has formed across everything covered. The people who made this show kept tucking real things into it. Real memories, real marriages, real places, real history, all folded quietly into the silliness where almost nobody would think to look. The next thing follows that same thread, and it might be the most touching one of all. There are two old heroes in this show, a pair of washed-up superheroes living in a retirement home, and the two famous men who gave them their voices were real-life friends and partners who had worked together long before SpongeBob ever existed. When those two men passed away, the show made a choice about their characters that was so respectful and so quiet that most fans never even understood what they were seeing, or why those two old heroes slowly went silent. Section 8. The heroes who were allowed to go quiet. SpongeBob and Patrick have heroes, not the way kids have a favorite athlete or singer. Real, full-blown, eyes-shining, hearts-pounding heroes. They sit in front of the television and watch reruns of an old superhero show, and they idolize the two old men in it the way some people idolize anyone. Those two old men are called Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Here is the joke of them, the thing that makes them so funny right from the start. They are superheroes, yes, but they are extremely old superheroes, long past their prime. They live in a retirement home in Bikini Bottom, a place for elderly folks, and they spend most of their time the way old men do, napping, complaining, forgetting things, getting cranky. Mermaid Man is round and forgetful, and a little out of it. The one thing that still flips a switch in him is the word evil. Say evil anywhere near him, and he snaps awake and bellows the word back, dragging it out into a long, dramatic shout, ready to fight crime, even though he can barely remember where he is. Barnacle Boy, who is supposed to be the young sidekick, is himself an old man now, shorter and more sensible and endlessly irritated by his bumbling partner. The two of them bicker like an old couple who have been stuck together for far too long. They are a gentle joke about getting old, about heroes who used to matter and now mostly sit around, about the strange sadness and comedy of a body that no longer does what it used to. And they are a parody, a playful copy of the big serious superheroes from old shows and comics, the ones who could breathe underwater and command sea creatures and zoom around saving the day. SpongeBob and Patrick worship these two creaky old men with absolutely no irony at all, and that pure devotion is a lot of what makes them so funny and so sweet. The thing that turns these two characters into one of the most touching stories in the whole show is who gave them their voices, and what the show did when those voices were gone. The two men who voiced Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy were not random voice actors. They were two famous performers, two men who had been entertaining people for a very long time, since decades before SpongeBob existed. And the truly special part is that these two men had worked together before, long ago, as a team. Years and years earlier, the pair of them had starred together in an old television show set on a Navy boat, a comedy where they played off each other and made audiences laugh. They had a real history together. They knew how to bounce lines back and forth, how to time a joke between them, how to play partners, because they actually had been partners on screen long before. So when the creator of SpongeBob needed voices for his two old bickering heroes, he and his team did not just want any two actors. They specifically wanted these two specific men, the famous old pair who had worked together before, sitting right at the top of their wish list. The reason was simple and lovely. The characters were two old partners who squabbled and cared about each other underneath all the squabbling. And here were two real old partners who had genuinely done that exact thing together, for real, decades earlier. Casting them meant the friendship between Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy was built on a real friendship and a real partnership between the men saying the lines. The team reached out to both men directly, and both of them said yes. The realness of it shows up in tiny ways. There is a story about the very first time one of them tried to do Mermaid Man's big dramatic shout of the word evil. When he reached for that long booming yell, his voice cracked on it, the way an older man's voice will crack when he pushes it. That crack is the sound of a real elderly man giving everything he had to a silly cartoon line, and it fit the character perfectly, because Mermaid Man is exactly that, an old man still trying to roar like the hero he used to be. The realness of the men leaked straight into the characters. Two genuine old partners, playing two pretend old partners, and the line between the two got thin and warm. Then, as happens to everyone, time caught up with the men behind the heroes. The actor who voiced Mermaid Man, the round forgetful one who shouted at the word evil, passed away. He had lived a long life and a long career, and he died as an old man, full of years. Sometime after that, the actor who voiced Barnacle Boy, the cranky, sensible sidekick, passed away as well, also an old man at the end of a long life. The two real partners were gone, the same way old partners eventually go, one and then the other. This is the moment where most shows would simply do the ordinary thing. When a voice actor for a character dies, shows almost always just find a new actor, someone who can copy the old voice closely enough, and they keep the character going as if nothing happened. The character talks on, season after season, in a borrowed imitation of the original voice. It is normal. It is practical. Audiences are used to it. Most people barely notice when it happens. The creator of SpongeBob chose not to do that. He made a different decision, a quiet one, and it is the kind of decision that says a great deal about a person. He decided not to replace them. He made the call that nobody else would speak full lines as Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. The voices of the two real partners would not be copied or faked or handed off to imitators. Instead, the characters would simply stop talking the way they used to. They still appear in the show now and then, but their speaking is cut down to almost nothing, a single word at most, or they show up only in the background, or another character dresses up as them rather than the heroes themselves doing the talking. The two old heroes were quietly allowed to go silent out of respect for the two old men who had given them their voices. Think about what that actually means and how gentle it is. The show could have kept those characters chattering away forever in fake voices. They were popular. SpongeBob and Patrick loved them. There would have been plenty of reasons to just keep them going, but the creator looked at it and decided that those particular voices belonged to those particular men, two real partners with a real history, and that it would be wrong to put their words in some imitator's mouth after they were gone. So he let the heroes fall quiet rather than let them be fake. The silence of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy in the later years of the show is not laziness or an accident. It is a tribute. It is the show tipping its hat to two men by refusing to pretend they were still there. Most fans never understood what they were seeing. A casual viewer might notice, vaguely, that the two old heroes do not talk much anymore, that they have faded into the background, that they show up but stay quiet. Hardly anyone connects that quiet to the deaths of the two real men, or understands that the silence is a deliberate choice made out of respect. The tribute is so soft and so unspoken that it hides in plain sight, the way so many things in this show do. The audience sees two old heroes going quiet and thinks nothing of it. Underneath, the show is mourning two friends and choosing dignity over convenience. This connects straight back to the thread running through everything covered so far. The people who made SpongeBob kept folding real life into the cartoon. Real marriages, real jobs, real places, real history. And here is the same thing again, in maybe its most tender form. Two real performers, two real partners, were folded into two characters built to mirror their real bond. And when those real men died, the show treated the characters the way you would treat the memory of a real friend, with care, with restraint, with a refusal to cheapen what they had given. The realness was poured in at the start, and the respect was poured in at the end, and both halves are invisible to almost everyone watching. There is something deeply human in the whole arc of it. These two characters were always, from the very beginning, a joke about getting old. Two heroes past their prime, napping in a retirement home, bodies failing, memories slipping, still trying to be the champions they once were. And the two men voicing them were themselves old men, near the ends of their own long lives, doing the work. The joke about aging was being performed by men who were actually aging, and then those men reached the natural end that the characters were always gently joking about, and the show responded by letting the characters quiet down too, almost as if the heroes were aging right alongside the men who voiced them. Pretend old heroes and real old men, walking the same path toward the same quiet, hand in hand, until both went still. It would have been so easy to do it the other way, to keep the heroes loud and active forever, in copied voices, frozen in cartoon time, never allowed to fade. That is what cartoons usually do. Cartoon characters are supposed to be immortal, untouched by the years that wear down the people who make them. But this show chose to let a little bit of real-life mortality touch its world. It let two characters carry the weight weight of 2 real deaths, not by killing them off in some dramatic story, but simply by letting them grow quiet and gentle and still. It is one of the rare times a cartoon allowed the real world's hardest fact that people we love eventually leave to leave a soft mark inside its bright pretend universe. And it did it so quietly that the mark is nearly invisible. That quietness is the whole point. A louder tribute would have missed it. A big tearful episode about the heroes dying would have turned private grief into a spectacle. Instead, the show chose the smallest, most respectful possible gesture, just letting them go quiet, letting them slip into the background, letting the silence say what words could not. It trusted that the gesture did not need to be understood by everyone to be worth making. Most people would never know. The creator made the respectful choice anyway, for an audience that mostly would not even notice, which is the truest kind of respect there is. The kind you offer when no one is watching and no one will thank you for it. So the 2 old heroes still sit in their retirement home in Bikini Bottom, appearing here and there, mostly silent now. SpongeBob and Patrick still adore them. New kids still meet them and laugh at the forgetful old man who shouts at the word evil. And underneath all of it sits a small, careful act of love, a decision to let 2 characters fall quiet rather than fake the voices of 2 friends who were gone. The heroes were allowed to grow old and go still, the way the real men did, and the show carried that loss the same way it carried everything else, gently, quietly, hidden right out in the open. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every piece of this so far has pointed at the same surprising truth about a show that looks, from the outside, like pure silliness. It was made by people who cared, who hid real depth and real feeling inside the jokes, who treated their own lives and their own friends with quiet seriousness, even while drawing a sponge laughing at a jellyfish. The last thing left to look at pulls the camera all the way back, away from any single character or building or choice, to ask the biggest question of all. How did so much weight, so much real history and real love and real loss end up packed inside a children's cartoon? And what does it mean that a whole generation absorbed all of it without ever once realizing what they were actually carrying? Section 9. The grown man who was never a kid. There is a question that sounds almost too simple to ask, and yet most people who grew up with this show get it wrong. How old is SpongeBob? Is he a child or a grown-up? Almost everyone deep down files him under kid. It feels obvious. He giggles, he bounces, he gets excited about the smallest things. He goes to school, he plays all day, chases jellyfish, builds with his best friend, throws tantrums, and bursts into tears and squeals with joy. Everything about how he acts screams little kid. So the brain does the easy thing and decides he must be one. A child, living a child's life in a child's world. SpongeBob is a grown man. He is an adult, a working adult with a job, a home, and bills, who has been an adult the entire time. The show even gave him a birth date, planted in some of the early episodes, and the math on that date makes him a fully grown man, not a child at all. The cheerful little creature everyone pictures as a kid is, by the show's own fact, an adult who simply happens to act young. This catches people off guard in the same way the octopus does. Everyone was sure. Everyone had it filed wrong. And the moment the truth shows up, there is that little jolt, that quiet wobble, the same one that hits when you learn a thing you were completely certain about was never true. He looks like a kid in the way he behaves, so the world decided he was one, and the world was wrong. The clues were there all along, sitting in plain sight, the way the clues always are in this show. SpongeBob has a job, a real one, that he goes to every single day. He cooks at a restaurant, he earns money, he has his own house, a whole pineapple to himself, which he pays for and takes care of. He has a pet he is responsible for. Children do not usually have full-time jobs and their own homes and a pet to feed. Adults do. The trappings of a grown-up life were stacked around him the whole time, and people just looked past them because his personality was so loud and so young that it drowned out everything else. So why does a grown adult go to school? Because SpongeBob does go to school, and that single fact is probably the biggest reason everyone assumes he is a kid. He attends a class. He has a teacher. He sits at a desk and gets nervous about tests. School is a kid thing. A grown man with a job does not go to school, and yet there he is, day after day, in a classroom. That one detail muddies the whole picture and tips people toward thinking he must be young. The reason behind that strange mix, a grown adult who still goes to school, is one of the most interesting hidden pieces in the entire history of the show, because it comes from an argument that happened before the show ever aired. It is a story about two different ideas crashing into each other, and a clever compromise that solved the problem so smoothly that nobody watching ever felt the seam. When the creator first dreamed up SpongeBob, he wanted him to be an adult, a grown-up character, living a grown-up life. That was the vision. A funny, childlike grown-up, sure, but a grown-up all the same, with a job and a home and the ordinary furniture of an adult life. The people in charge of the channel, the ones who decide what gets made and what does not, had a different idea. They believed, based on how these things usually went, that a cartoon would not work unless the main character was a kid who went to school. Kids watching at home want a character they see themselves in, the thinking went, and kids see themselves in other kids, in classrooms and homework and the whole world of being young. So the channel pushed for SpongeBob to be a school child. The creator creator wanted an adult, the channel wanted a kid. Those two visions could not both be true at once, and somebody had to give. The solution they landed on was quietly brilliant. They kept SpongeBob as an adult, exactly as the creator wanted, with his job and his home and his grown-up life. And then they invented a reason for an adult to attend a school. They created a new character and a new kind of school to go with her. Instead of an ordinary kids' school, SpongeBob would attend a boating school, a place where you learn to drive a boat, run by a teacher made just for that purpose. Learning to drive is something adults do, so an adult attending a driving school made perfect sense, and it gave the show a classroom and a teacher and all the school-based jokes the channel wanted, without ever making SpongeBob into a child. That compromise is why SpongeBob can have a full-time job and his own pineapple house and still sit nervously at a school desk failing his driving test over and over. He is an adult learning to drive, not a kid learning his letter. The school is a driving school. The teacher is a driving instructor. The whole setup was engineered to satisfy two opposite demands at once, to let the creator keep his grown-up character while giving the channel the school setting they insisted on. And it worked so seamlessly that for more than 20 years, audiences took the school at face value, saw a classroom, and quietly concluded SpongeBob was a kid, never realizing the school existed precisely so he could be an adult. The creator was happy with how it turned out. He even described the whole thing as a good outcome, a positive that came out of the disagreement. Two stubborn ideas met in the middle and produced something better than either side started with. A grown-up character with a kid's classroom built right into his life. It is one of those rare cases where an argument between the people making something and the people paying for it actually improved the final result instead of wrecking it. Once a person knows SpongeBob is an adult, the whole show shifts a little, and it shifts in a way that makes it richer rather than worse. Because if he is a grown man, then his endless cheerfulness stops being the simple happiness of a child who does not know any better. It becomes the chosen, deliberate, almost stubborn joy of a grown-up who has every reason an adult has to be tired and worn down, and who decides to be delighted anyway. Think about what an adult life actually contains. A job you have to show up to, whether you feel like it or not. Bills, a boss, routines that repeat without end, the slow grind of doing the same things over and over, year after year. Squidward, who is also an adult, feels every bit of that weight, and it has made him bitter and gray and miserable. He and SpongeBob have nearly the same life, same town, same restaurant, same boss, same daily grind. Two grown adults with almost identical circumstances. One of them is crushed by it, and one of them is overjoyed by it, and the difference between them is not their situation, but their choice about how to meet it. That is a far more interesting character than a happy kid. A happy kid is happy because the kid does not yet know how heavy life gets. A happy adult, an adult who knows exactly how dull and hard and repetitive a working life can be and chooses to be thrilled by frying burgers anyway, is doing something braver and stranger and more admirable. SpongeBob's joy is not innocence. It is a kind of quiet courage. He has the same reasons to be Squidward that Squidward has, and he refuses to be Squidward. Knowing he is a grown man is what turns his cheerfulness from cute into something almost heroic. This is the thing the show seems to understand far better than most people give it credit for. It put two adults side by side in the same trap, the same job, the same town, and used them to ask a real question about how to live. Squidward is the answer where the weight wins, where the daily grind and the disappointment and the unmet dreams slowly turn a person sour. SpongeBob is the answer where the person decides, against all of it, to love the small things, the job, the friends, the ordinary day. The show never lectures about this. It never stops to explain it. It just lets the two of them live next to each other, year after year, and lets the contrast do the quiet work. And it only fully lands once you understand they are both grown men, both facing the same adult life, choosing opposite ways to carry it. There is something almost comforting in it for the grown-ups watching, even the ones who do not realize why. A lot of the people who loved SpongeBob as children are adults now themselves, with jobs and bills and the same daily grind the show was quietly built around. They grew up. They entered the very kind of life SpongeBob was secretly living the whole time. And going back to the show as an adult hits differently because now they are in his shoes. Now they know what it is to drag yourself to work, to repeat the same week endlessly, to feel the pull toward becoming a Squidward. And there is SpongeBob, a grown adult just like them, choosing joy in the middle of all of it. The show was modeling for an entire generation of future adults a way of meeting adult life that they would not need until years later. It planted the lesson early and let it wait. That is part of the genius hiding under the silliness. The show dressed a grown-up story in kid clothing. It looked like a cartoon about a playful child, so kids watched it and loved it and absorbed it. But underneath, it was the story of an adult finding a way to be happy in an ordinary working life, which is one of the most adult problems there is. Children took in the bright surface. The deeper things sank in quietly and stayed, waiting to mean something later. Once those children grew into the very life SpongeBob had been living all along. The kid clothing got the lesson past the gate. The grown-up truth did the lasting work. It also reframes the school and Mrs. Puff and all those endless failed driving tests in a gentler light. SpongeBob is not a struggling student. He is a grown adult adult who is genuinely, hopelessly bad at one specific thing, no matter how hard he tries, and who keeps showing up to try again anyway. He fails the driving test constantly. He has been failing it for years, and he never stops trying, never gives up, never decides he is too old or too embarrassed to keep at it. There is something quietly moving in that too. An adult who is bad at something and refuses to quit, who walks back into that classroom over and over to fail again with his chin up. It is the same chosen, stubborn optimism pointed at his own clear weakness. Most grown-ups quietly avoid the things they are bad at. The fact that all of this came out of a behind-the-scenes argument makes it better, not worse. The creator did not sit down and plan a deep meditation on adult joy. He wanted an adult character. The channel wanted a kid. They compromised on a boating school, and the strange, beautiful result, a grown man who goes to school and works a job and chooses delight, fell out of that compromise almost by accident. The depth was partly an accident of two groups of people disagreeing and meeting in the middle, but that is often how the best things get made, not through one perfect vision, but through a clash that forces something unexpected and richer into being. The tension produced the treasure, so the simple question turns out not to be simple at all. How old is SpongeBob? He is a grown man, an adult the whole time, made to look and act like a kid by a personality so young and bright that it fooled an entire planet of viewers. He goes to school because of an old argument and a clever fix, not because he is a child. He works and pays for his home and cares for his pet because that is what adults do. And his famous, relentless, unkillable happiness is the chosen joy of a grown-up who has every reason to be tired and decides to be glad instead. The kid everyone remembers was never a kid. He was a working adult choosing every single day to love a small, ordinary life. And that is a far better story than the one most people thought they were watching. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This is the pattern reaching its fullest shape. A show that looks like nonsense was quietly carrying grown-up weight the entire time, slipping it past children inside bright colors and silly jokes, trusting it to surface years later when those children needed it. The hidden adult, the chosen joy. The lesson planted early and left to wait. It all points toward one last, larger truth about this whole strange, beloved show. A truth that pulls every thread together. Because the deepest secret of SpongeBob is not any single hidden fact about a guitar, or a name, or a building. It is the simple, astonishing reality that a whole generation absorbed a quiet education in how to be a person, in joy and grief and memory and love, from a cartoon about a sponge, and carried that lesson for the rest of their lives without ever once knowing they were being taught. Section 10. The man who hid himself in the show. Every secret covered so far points back to the same place. The guitar that fooled a generation. The octopus wearing a squid's name. The ghost story and the borrowed 100-year-old face. The episodes that quietly vanished. The real island with a heavy history sitting under a cartoon town. The marriage hidden inside a computer. The summer job baked into a restaurant. The two old heroes allowed to go silent. The grown man dressed up as a kid. Pull on any one of those threads and it leads to the same hand, the same person, the same quiet source. The whole show, every hidden layer of it, traces back to one man. His name was Steven Hillenburg. And to understand why SpongeBob is the way it is, you have to understand that he was not a normal cartoon maker. He was something rarer, and the show is what it is because of who he was. Before he ever drew a cartoon, Hillenburg loved the ocean, not in a casual way. He loved it deeply, seriously, the way some people love a thing their whole life from childhood. And he did something about that love. He studied the ocean for real, learned how its creatures live, how they behave, what made them strange and wonderful. Then he took that knowledge and taught it. He stood in front of people and explained the sea to them, working at a place by the water whose whole job was helping ordinary people understand the ocean. He was a teacher of the sea before he was anything else. He spent his days helping others see what he saw in the water. While he was doing that teaching work, he made a little book to help explain ocean creatures to the people who came through. It was a small educational thing, full of sea animals, drawn with personality, made to teach. And one of the characters in that little teaching book was a sponge. That sponge was the distant ancestor of SpongeBob himself. The most famous cartoon character of his generation was born not from a desire to sell toys or fill a time slot, but from a sea-loving teacher trying to make the ocean fun and clear for regular people. The seed of the whole thing was a teacher's love and a teacher's wish to share what he knew. That origin explains almost everything else. It explains why the show is stuffed with real ocean creatures, a sponge and a starfish and a crab and a squid, even when they are bent and silly and wrong. It explains why the town is named after a real place in the real sea. It explains the lobster trap restaurant and the careful little touches that only a person who genuinely knew the ocean would think to include. The show is full of the sea because the man who made it spent his life in love with the sea. He was not decorating a cartoon with ocean stuff. He was building a whole world out of the thing he cared about most. But here's the part that matters more than the ocean knowledge. The part that ties together every secret in this whole piece. Hillenburg did not just pour his expertise into the show. He poured himself into it. His actual life, his memories, his marriage, his sense of humor, his friendships, his choices about right and wrong. The show is not only made by him, it is made of him. Look at what has already been uncovered and see how much of it is just pieces of one man's real life hidden in cartoon shapes. The villain's computer wife carries the name of his real wife, and her humor was drawn from his real wife's humor. The most important restaurant in the show is his own real summer job, the grill he actually cooked at, with his real old manager turned into the boss. SpongeBob's job as a cook is the job Hillenburg himself once worked. When those two old hero actors died, it was Hillenburg who decided to let the characters go silent rather than fake their voices, a choice that came from his own sense of what was decent. Over and over, the hidden depths in this show turn out to be hidden pieces of him, his wife, his job, his values, his love. He took his own ordinary life and folded it, quietly, into a cartoon where almost no one would ever notice it was there. That is a strange and beautiful thing for a person to do. Most people who make something for a giant audience keep themselves out of it, or only let a little show through. Hillenburg did the opposite. He tucked the realest, most personal parts of his life into the silliest possible container, a children's show about a sponge, and then said almost nothing about it. He did not put up a sign explaining that the computer was named after his wife, or that the restaurant was his old job. He just slipped these pieces of himself in, and let them sit there, disguised, for anyone who someday cared enough to look. The show became a quiet hiding place for his whole life, and because his life was in there, his feelings got in there too, and that is the deepest secret of all. SpongeBob looks, from the outside, like pure nonsense, a loud, bright cartoon with no weight to it, but a show made out of a real person's real life cannot help carrying real feeling. The joy in it is real joy, the kind a man who loved his work and his wife and the ocean actually felt. The sadness in it, the Squidward ache of wanting more than you have, is a real human sadness somebody understood well enough to draw. The respect in it, the quiet way it honored its dead actors, is a real man's real respect. The show feels like more than nonsense because it is more than nonsense. It is a person, hidden in a sponge. This is why the show did something to the people who grew up with it that they never quite noticed happening. A whole generation of children sat in front of this cartoon for years, laughing at the jokes, soaking up the bright colors, never suspecting they were absorbing anything important. And the whole time, quietly, they were being handed real things. A lesson about joy, carried by a grown man who chose to be glad in an ordinary life. A lesson about grief and disappointment, carried by a sad octopus who wanted to be more than he was. A lesson about love, hidden in a computer on a wall. A lesson about respect, in two heroes who were allowed to fall silent. A whisper of real history, sung in a theme song nobody examined. These were not lessons the children knew they were learning. They went in sideways, under the laughter, the way the best lessons often do. Children took in the surface. They thought they were just watching something funny. But underneath the funny, a sea-loving teacher was doing the same thing he had always done. The thing he did before he ever made cartoons. He was teaching. He had spent his early life teaching people about the ocean, helping them see the depth and wonder under the surface of the water. And then he spent the rest of his life doing the exact same thing in a different form, teaching a generation about being a person, helping them see the depth and feeling hidden under the bright, silly surface of a cartoon. He never stopped being a teacher. He just changed his classroom from the seaside to the screen, and his subject from sea creatures to something much harder to name. The students never even realized class was in session. That is the astonishing thing, the truth that pulls every thread in this whole piece together. A generation absorbed a quiet education in how to live, in joy and sadness and memory and love and respect from a cartoon about a sponge, and carried that education with them for the rest of their lives without ever once knowing they were being taught. The guitar they remember wrong, the octopus they misnamed, the ghost they cannot pronounce, the episodes that vanished, the heavy island under the happy town, the marriage in the machine, the job in the restaurant, the heroes who went quiet, the grown man playing a child. Every single one of those is a place where the real world and the real man slipped into the cartoon and left something behind, and almost nobody noticed any of it because it was all hidden so gently, under so much laughter, by a man who never asked to be noticed. There is one last fact that makes all of this land with full weight. Steven Hillenburg is gone now. He developed a serious illness, the kind there is no beating, and it took his life. He died knowing the show would go on without him, knowing the world he built would keep running long after he could no longer steer it. And he left it behind exactly the way he had made it, full of himself, full of his life, full of quiet things hidden under bright colors, waiting. So everything in the show that felt like more than nonsense really was a kind of goodbye, even before anyone knew a goodbye was coming. A man who loved the ocean, and loved his wife, and loved his work, poured all of it into a cartoon, and then left. And the cartoon kept playing, carrying him forward into the lives of people who never met him and never will. Every time the show makes someone laugh, a small piece of him is doing the laughing. Every time it makes someone feel that quiet ache or that unexpected warmth, a piece of him is reaching across, still teaching, still sharing, still showing people the depth under the surface, the only way he ever knew how. He hid himself in a sponge, and the sponge carried him on. That is the real secret of SpongeBob, bigger than any single hidden fact. It is not a show show that happens to have some buried trivia in it. It is a man's whole heart disguised as something silly so that it could slip past everyone's defenses and lodge itself somewhere deep where it would do its quiet work for decades. A generation was taught how to be alive by someone they thought was only making them laugh. And that, more than any guitar or vampire or vanished episode, is the thing worth understanding about this strange, beloved, bottomless cartoon. The silliness was never the point. The silliness was the door. And a sea-loving teacher walked his students through it without a single one of them realizing where they were being led. There is still one thing left to do with all of this. One final place to take everything that has been uncovered. Because knowing the secrets is only half of it. The other half is what a person does with them. How the whole picture changes once every hidden piece is laid side by side and seen all at once. And what it means to go back and watch the show again, knowing everything you now know. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.